Colonel Wendell Krebs had been working the last lot of the day for 4 solid minutes, and in 4 minutes not one hand in that yard had gone up. It stood at the end of the equipment row in the churned mud, and it was taller than any man standing near it. A cage. That was the only word the crowd had for it. Scrolled metal grillwork running from knee-height to well over your head. A folding accordion gate hanging off one side on a bent track, a domed cast crown on top with a lamp bracket still bolted through it. All of it painted the flat gray of a boiler room, and all of it streaked down the corners with rust where 40 years of weather had found the iron underneath. It had no wheels, no legs, and no bottom that anybody could see. It sat on 2 oak timbers. Somebody had chalked a number on the side of it, Lot 361. It had come out of the Wexler Hotel in Halloway, Missouri, 5 stories of red brick on the north side of the courthouse square, opened in 1912, closed in the fall of 1971, pulled down in the spring of 1977 with a crane and a ball. The wrecking contractor who took the building down was a man named Tug Roscoe, and Tug Roscoe had a lifelong habit of saving things he had no plan for. He set the elevator car off in the weeds behind his shop, threw a tarp over it, and died 2 winters later without ever telling anybody why he kept it. That is how it came to be standing in the mud at his estate sale on the 4th Saturday of October, 1978, in front of about 200 people, none of whom wanted it. "Give me $200, Krebs said. "There is 400 pounds of good iron standing right there in front of you. Nobody moved. Give me 100. A man near the front called out loud enough to carry back to the fence line, "I will give you 100 if you haul it off and set it in my wife's flower bed." That got the laugh. And once a crowd laughs at a lot, that lot is finished. The man who made the joke was Marvin Stroud, who sold farm implements off a gravel lot out on the highway and wore the same mustard-tan jacket to every sale in the county. Stroud had a way of standing with his weight on one leg and his chin up, and he used it now. He turned half around so the people behind him could hear it too. "Think about it," he said. "You cannot use it. You cannot move it. And you cannot cut it up without a torch and a whole bad afternoon. That is not an item. That is a chore." Somebody by the hay rake laughed so hard he had to take his hat off. Krebs was hoarse, and it was 3:10, and he had sold 360 lots since 8 that morning. "50, he said. "Somebody give me $50 and take it home." And a voice from back by the fence, flat and unhurried, said 70. Every head in the yard turned around. Krebs stopped. He actually looked down at his own sheet, because in 29 years of selling, he had never had a man raise a price that nobody else was bidding on. 70, he said. "I have got $70 on the ask of 50. Sir, I will take 50. 70, the voice said again. So Krebs said sold, and wrote it down, and stepped off the flatbed, and the yard made the noise a crowd makes when it thinks it has just watched a man make a mistake in public and pay extra for it. The buyer was Emmett Ordway. He was 67 years old. He had retired 2 years earlier after 38 years as the maintenance man for the Halloway School District. And he wore blue denim bib overalls and a straw hat gone the color of weak tea. He walked up the row without hurrying, gave the clerk $70 in cash, took the yellow paper tag off the gate, folded it once, and put it in his shirt pocket. Marvin Stroud said something to him on the way past. Emmett said, "That is a fair point, Marvin," and kept walking. The clerk wrote it on the sheet the way it would sit in the county records for the next 40 years. Lot 361, elevator car, $70, Ordway. If you've made it this far into Emmett's story, hit subscribe. Because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Here is what 200 people at that sale did not know, and what Emmett Ordway had known since he was 19 years old. The cage was not iron. In the summer of 1929, Emmett had gone to work at the Wexler as the night elevator operator, 6 at night to 6 in the morning, 6 nights a week, 40 cents an hour. He ran that car for 7 years. And one of the things a night man did in a hotel that took itself seriously in 1929 was maintain the car itself, because there was nothing else to do between 2 in the morning and 5. So every winter on the slow nights, Emmett Ordway had gone over that grill work panel by panel with a rag and a can of polish and a tin of oil. And he knew the way you know your own hands that the scroll work and the gate and the crown of that car were solid cast bronze. The hotel had painted the whole thing institutional gray in 1952, long after he had left, the way people in 1952 painted anything that took work. He also knew it did not weigh 400 pounds. It weighed something better than 1,100. At the preview on Friday morning, before the yard filled up, Emmett had walked out there at 7 with a 3-cornered file in his pocket. He crouched down at the back corner, out of the wind, and drew that file once across the underside of a piece of scrollwork where nobody would ever look. The gray came away in a line about as long as a matchstick, and underneath it the metal was yellow. He put the file back in his pocket, stood up, and did not tell one living soul. Then he came back the next day and let the whole county laugh at him for $20 over the ask. It took him 9 days and $85 to get it home. A neighbor with a lowboy trailer hauled it. Rasco's own yard crane picked it, and the operator whistled when the boom took the weight. Because a 400-pound item does not do that to a boom. 3 men and a chain fall walked it into Emmett's machine shed behind a house, and it stood there in the middle of the concrete floor under a drop light, gray and streaked, and 8 feet tall, taking up the space where he normally parked the mower. Vera Ordway came out with 2 cups of coffee and looked at it for a while. "Where does it go?" she said. "I do not know yet," Emmett said. "That is what I thought," she said, and gave him his cup. He worked on it all through November. Paint stripper and a putty knife and a brass brush, panel by panel, in a cold shed with the door cracked for the fumes, which is exactly the same work he had done on the night shift as a young man, only backwards. The gray came off in sheets and curls. Under it there was a second coat, a dark green, which he did not remember at all. And under the green there was the metal. It came up the color of a trumpet, grape clusters, wheat sheaves, a pattern of interlocking rings around the whole top rail. 2 panels of it had been cast so cleanly you could read the veins in the leaves. On the inside face of the gatepost, where a lifetime of shoulders had rubbed the paint thin, there was a plate. Rowan and Deal Elevator Works, Cincinnati, Ohio, 1911. He stood in the shed and looked at that for a long time. Then he went in the house and ate supper and did not say anything about it, because Emmett Ordway was not a man who announced things. By the first week of December, the cage was clean, and the only part left was the floor. Now, the floor of a passenger car like that one was originally a brass ventilating grill set in a hardwood frame so the air would move when the car ran. Emmett knew that floor. He had swept it 6 nights a week for 7 years. What was in front of him in the shed was not that floor. It was a plate of sheet steel riveted down at the edges into the frame, with a rubber mat glued over the top of it and worn through in 2 places to the steel. He remembered when it appeared. That is the thing he would tell people about later, and the thing he could never quite get across. He remembered coming in one evening in the spring of 1934 and finding the floor of his own car changed. Covered over, a mat where the grill had been. He had asked nothing about it. He was 23 years old and it was 1934, and you did not ask the Wexler Hotel questions about its own property if you liked working there. It took him most of a Saturday to drill out 41 rivets. When the last one let go, he got a pry bar under the edge, and the plate came up about an inch, and something dropped out of the corner onto the concrete. It was a square of newspaper, folded 8 times into a hard little pad about the size of a matchbox, gone the color of a grocery sack, and pressed so flat it had taken the shape of the frame. Somebody had driven it in as a shim to stop the plate rocking. That is a thing carpenters have done for 200 years. He worked it open on the bench with a putty knife, 1 fold at a time, and it came apart into a page and a half of the Halloway Ledger Enterprise for Saturday, March 17th, 1934. There was a feed advertisement. There was a report of a school board meeting. And down at the bottom of the second column on the back, in a 2-inch item, with no byline and no follow-up, it said that an employee of the Wexler Hotel had been discharged in connection with the disappearance of a piece of jewelry belonging to a guest, that the value was placed at $2,600, and that the hotel considered the matter closed. The item named her. Emmett read the name and sat down on an upturned bucket in his own shed with the drop light swinging over his head and his hands on his knees, and did not get up for a while. Cordy Tannehill had been a chambermaid at the Wexler. She was a small woman with a fast walk who did the 3rd and 4th floors, and she rode Emmett's car up at the end of her shift most nights of the week for 4 years. And she called him Ordway instead of Emmett because she thought it was funny. In March of 1934, she was accused of taking a diamond brooch out of a guest's room. She was never charged. She was never cleared. There was no trial because there was no evidence, because you do not need evidence to fire a chambermaid. She was gone from the county by the end of April, and she was gone from everybody's conversation by June, and Emmett Ordway, who had been the night man on the only elevator in that building the entire week it happened, had been asked nothing and had said nothing. And now, 44 years later, in his own machine shed, an old man understood 2 things at once. The first was that whoever laid that steel plate had done it in the same week as that newspaper. The second was that a hotel elevator car has a floor void under the grill, 4 inches deep, running the whole width of the frame, and that from 1912 until the week the plate went down, everything that fell through that grill had gone into it and stayed there. He got the plate off at 11 o'clock that night. The void was packed, not with treasure, with a hotel. It came out in coffee cans, grit and lint and cinder dust first, a solid mat of it, and then the objects, and there were hundreds. Hairpins by the double handful, collar buttons, 212 pennies, 41 dimes, 9 quarters, a Canadian nickel, and a Mexican coin nobody could read, a tortoiseshell comb with 3 teeth gone, ticket stubs, matchbooks, and each matchbook a business that no longer existed, a pocket knife with a stag handle, 4 keys on a wooden fob with a room number burned into it, a gold wedding band, size small, no engraving, a partial denture, a pair of spectacles folded shut, a brass whistle, a tube of lipstick worn to nothing, a child's marble, blue, buttons, 200 and some, of every material a person could make a button from, and paper, receipts, a laundry list, a torn half of a photograph showing two men in shirt sleeves in front of a car, and a claimed check for a suitcase that had been sitting in a baggage room somewhere since the Coolidge administration. 22 years of a 5-story hotel, walking back and forth over a brass grill and never once looking down. Emmett laid it all out on newspaper on his bench, and Vera came out to the shed and helped him sort it, and by 2 in the morning of the second night, they had 9 pounds of the residue of other people's lives arranged by category on a workbench in a farm town in Missouri. And the Brook was not in it. He went through the grit twice more with a magnet and a screen. He was not looking for money. He had been perfectly clear with himself about what he was looking for since the moment he read that name. It was not there. You have to understand what that did to him. For 11 days, he had been the only man alive who knew that a woman had been blamed for something in the same week the floor of that car was sealed up, and he had let himself believe those two facts were the same fact. Now he had opened it, and it was buttons. He put the plate back over the void and did not go out to the shed for most of a week. What got him back out there was the gate. The accordion gate on that car had been dragging for probably 30 years, and Emmett, being who he was, could not leave it. In the 3rd week of December, he pulled the gate off to rebuild the track, and the track was a U-shaped bronze channel, 1.25 inches wide, that ran the full width of the doorway at the sill. It was packed absolutely solid, end to end, with what 44 years does to grease and lint and floor grit. It had gone the consistency of roofing tar. He dug it out with a screwdriver and a shop rag, in strips, and about 14 inches from the left end, the screwdriver stopped on something that did not give. He got it out with a pair of long pliers and carried it under the drop light, and what was in his hand was a lump of black grease the size of a walnut. He rolled it in kerosene and worked it with his thumbs, and the grease came away. And there was a spray of white metal shaped like a sheaf of wheat, and in the wheat there were 48 old diamonds, and they had not seen light since Franklin Roosevelt's first year in office. It had never gone into the floor void at all. It had gone into the gate track, 18 inches from where he stood every night of his life, and the mop had passed over it, and the grease had taken it. And the plate had been laid down 4 feet away for a completely unrelated reason, which is how the truth usually hides. Simon Vandergriff had been the jeweler on the square for 51 years, and Emmett was in his shop when he unlocked on Monday. Vandergriff put the loop in and did not say anything for a full minute and a half. "Platinum," he said. "Old European cuts, and they are all matched, which nobody does anymore. Made by a St. Louis house. This is a 1920s piece, and it is a very good one." Then he turned it over. "And here," he said, "is your whole story. Look at the catch. The pin catch is sprung, and it has been soldered once already, badly, with soft solder. Somebody repaired this on the cheap, and it let go a second time. Emmett, a piece like this does not get stolen and then dropped in a doorway. A thief does not throw away 48 diamonds. This came off a coat." The Halloway Ledger Enterprise put out a paper twice a week from 1889 forward, and the bound volumes were in the basement of the library, and Alva Renfro, who was in her 70s and kept the newspaper morgue for the Historical Society, knew exactly where 1934 was. It took them 2 afternoons. The guest was Mrs. Adele Vance of St. Louis, in town for a wedding, staying 4 nights. She had reported the brooch missing on the morning of the 16th of March. The hotel had questioned its staff that same day. Cordy Tannehill, who had cleaned that floor, was discharged that afternoon. And that was the entirety of it. There was no follow-up item ever, because in 1934 a small-town paper printed the accusation as news and never once considered the ending to be news. Alva Renfro found the rest of it in the county records. Cordy Tannehill had left Halloway in April of 1934. She had worked 26 years in a commercial laundry in Kansas City. She had died in 1961 at 59 years old, and she had 4 surviving children, and the oldest of them, Wanda, was 58 years old and living in Rose Springs, 31 miles up the highway. Emmett Ordway drove up there on a Tuesday in January of 1979 with the brooch and a cigar box on the seat beside him and no idea in the world what he was going to say. What he said, standing on her porch with his hat in his hand, was, "Mrs. Spears, my name is Emmett Ordway, and I ran the elevator at the Wexler Hotel. And I have got something here that belongs to your mother's name." She was 14 the week it happened. She remembered her mother coming home in the middle of the afternoon, which never happened, and sitting down at the table in her coat, which never happened either. She remembered that nobody in the family ever said the word out loud, and that her mother went to her grave in 1961 carrying it, and that Wanda herself had spent 45 years not entirely certain, in the part of a person where certainty is supposed to live. She put her hands flat on the kitchen table and looked at the wheat sheaf lying on the cigar box lid, and she said, "So, she did not do it." "No," Emmett said. "She never touched it. It fell off the woman's coat in the door of my car, and it went in the gate track, and I walked over it for 2 more years and never knew." Mrs. Adele Vance had died in 1958. Her nephew, Carlton Vance, was 78 and living in St. Louis, and Emmett wrote him a 4-page letter in pencil and mailed it and expected nothing. Carlton Vance drove down himself in March. He sat in the Ordways' front room for 2 hours and listened to the whole thing, start to finish. Then he asked for a sheet of paper, and he wrote out and signed a statement that the brooch had never been stolen, that his aunt had lost it herself through a faulty catch she had been warned about, and that whatever it was worth belonged to the family of the woman who was blamed for it. It appraised at $14,000. Wanda Spears sold it in the fall and split it 4 ways with her brothers, and the first thing she did with her share was buy a stone for her mother's grave in Kansas City, because there had never been one. The Ledger Enterprise ran the story on the front page on the 15th of March, 1979, 45 years and 2 days after the 2-inch item at the bottom of the second column. Alva Renfro made them run the original clipping alongside it at the same size, so anybody could see what the 2 things looked like next to each other. An architect from St. Louis heard about the cage and drove out to the shed in April with a tape measure and an offer of $9,500 for a hotel restoration downtown. Emmett Ordway thanked him and said no. He gave the car to the Halloway County Museum instead, which is in the old bank building on the square 40 feet from where the Wexler used to stand. And it took 8 men and a rented crane and most of a Saturday to walk it through the doors. It stands in the lobby now with the gate oiled and working. Visitors are allowed to slide it, and it makes the sound it made in 1931, which is a sound like a handful of change and a bank vault at the same time. Taped inside the frame at shoulder height is a yellow paper auction tag with $70 written on it in grease pencil. Below that is a printed card that gives the maker, the date, the building, and then 4 lines about a chambermaid named Cordy Tannehill, who was discharged from the Wexler Hotel in March of 1934 for a theft that never happened. and who is owed an apology by everybody who read the first article and nobody who read the second. And on the back corner of the bottom rail, where the polish crew was told to leave it alone, there is a bright line about as long as a matchstick, filed through the paint at 7 o'clock on a Friday morning by the only man in the county who bothered to look under a thing before he laughed at it. Marvin Stroud came to the museum on the day it opened in the mustard-tan jacket. He stood in front of the cage a long time with his hands in his pockets. Emmett was across the room and let him alone. "I stood 10 feet from that thing," Stroud said finally, to nobody in particular. "I stood 10 feet from it, and I looked right at it, and all I saw was gray paint." Vera Ordway was the one who put it best, and she said it in her own kitchen, not to a newspaper. 200 people looked at that thing, she said. Emmett was the only one who looked under it, and that is the whole difference between the 200 of them and him. And it always was, and it is the reason a woman who has been in the ground since 1961 has got her name back this year. The cage cost $70. It was worth $9,500. Neither one of those numbers is what the story is about, and if you have got a shed with something in it that everybody told you to leave alone, you already know that.